And this evening, sponsored by the Preder, Mishpach Alai and Shlomo Preder, sponsoring in memory of his dear mother, Esther Yehuda's Preder, Esther Yehuda's Bas, Rabbi Yaakov Mordechai, Alei Hashem, Leilig and Hashem Shvizoche, to a tremendous continuous Aliyah and Hashem and Gan Eden, Shamayla Mechayel Ochayel. I want to mention as well the Nadiv Yom, the Mishnay's plaques, Yechiel ben Eliezer, Zerach ben Chaim Eliezer Rivka, Alei Abbas Shlomo, Alei Mashalom, all the Heilig and Hashem Shvizoche, a tremendous continuous Aliyah and Hashem, Gan Eden, Shamayla Mechayel Ochayel, Emir Hashem, as well as tomorrow night, Chai Pero Bas, Yitzchak, Isaac, Alei Shalom, all the Heilig and Hashemas, Leila, Leila, Gan Eden, Shamayla, Ad, Yemos Mashiach, and Tchias, Ameis, and Bikarov.
Amen.
Baruch Atah Adonai, Eloheinu, Melech HaOlam, Shehakol Nehiyeh Bidvaro. Usiyata Nishmaya, let's begin with an unbelievable Maisa. A Maisa that we've mentioned briefly in the past, that Shmuel Birnbaum shares with us in his Gavaldige Sefer LaTorah B'Korei Shemo, Parshas Vayakel. Hazok the Mir Rosh Hashiva Shmuel Birnbaum Zechat Tzadik Levrocha. What in the world is this idea of Moshe Rabbeinu being charged with the task, Alpi the Rebbeinu Shalom, of holding up Betzalel and letting Klal Yisrael know, Re'u Karasi Abishem Betzalel Benuri Mechor Lamati Yehuda. What's this idea of Re'u Klal Yisrael? See this Betzalel Benuri Mechor. What in the world is going on here? Explains to Shmuel Birnbaum. There might have been greater Talmidei Chachamim in the Dar. There were certainly plenty of people older than Betzalel. Stay in the Gemara Sanhedrin, he was only 13 years old at the time. And we didn't know much about Betzalel, but in the end of the day, what? Hazok to Shmuel Birnbaum, he's 13 years old, but Abishur says, Amali Yosef, Baruch, Bechachma, B'Diyah, B'Diyah, Achachma, Bina Das, to whom am I giving? I'm giving it to Betzalel ben Uri ben Chur. That means you could have far older people, you could have greater Gedolei Yisrael, Koach HaP'sak, V'chulei, V'chulei, but when it comes to the Siyata D'Shmayim Yechedes, who's going to be charged with building the Mishkan? That's Betzalel. You can be someone who knows Kol Torah Kula, but how are you going to put him a Mishkan? How are you going to build an Aron? Brachos and Hayim and Aleph, Yadei Hayim Betzalel, Tzarek Ben Osio, Shabbat Nivru Shemayim and Oretz. I'm giving him that Chochma Bina Das. I'm giving him that Miyuchadik Siyata D'Shmayim. That is the one who is going to lead the charge to be at the helm, at the forefront of the Asiyas B'niyas HaMishkan, because nobody would have that Chochmah. No one has the requisite knowledge. Achbarak, the one who was given it, Ayadei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the famous Arichas or Chaim Shmulevitz, and Sichas Musar, who are the Chochmei Lev. Chochmah is not intertwined with the heart. Chochmah is always interconnected, interrelated with the Moach, with the Seichel, the Rosh. Elawat, nobody had the Chochmah in the Rosh. They were slaves. How in the world are they going to build an edifice called the Mishkan? Whoever had the Shifas, the Chukah, and the Lev, Mamela was given the Chochmah, Yo Chachmos and the Chakim, and the one who had the Chukah, that pining, that yearning to want to have the Chochmah, those individuals to whom HaKadosh Baruch Hu bestowed that unbelievable wisdom, the one who's going to be at the helm is Betzalel. He is given that Miyuchadik Siyata D'Shmayim. So he brings a couple of Gevaldik Maislach, and among the Maisim that he brings is one to Nagei Rav Moshe Feinstein, a Talmud Mufak of the Rosh Hashiva of Kamenetz Baruch Ber Zatzal. Once came to Rav Moshe and asked him a kasha, and Devarim Odem Uruma Shalola, Mamish, an Indian place, Pekor Nafashis, and he asked Rav Moshe Feinstein the Posek Ador, and Rav Moshe gave him an answer on the spot, right away, take it from Miyad. And meanwhile, this Talmud of Reb Baruch Ber, he looks to Rav Moshe and he starts screaming at the Posek at the Gil Ador, and he raises his voice and he says, Azai Chutzpah, he says, my Rebbe Reb Baruch Ber, had I asked him this Shaila, he would have sat for 3 days, locked himself in a room and gone through the Sugya Rishonim and Achronim. And Rav Moshe, you're able to answer on the spot. How could you take on such a kasha? Such a davar chomer, an answer, take it from me on instantly. And Moshe looks at him, mamish, with his pastors, with his anibus, and he says, Ken Zayin, your Rebbe Rebbe was a much bigger lamdan than I am. He says, but I'm the Posek Ador, and he wasn't. And the end of the day, what's my kavanoso? Avadi, he says, Altalamdin, Einachanami, the Bercha Shmuel says, Moshe, Taki, he's a bigger lamdin. He says, but if I'm the Posek Ador, I'm the one who gets a Siyata D'Shmaya, with all of his Gaudalas. But if I'm the one who gets a Siyata D'Shmaya, it's going to come to me. That was Mitochan V'Sanuso. But Avadi, what's Moshe saying? He's the Posek Ador. Hashem is not going to have it. Takola Kama Yodo. He's the one who gets a Siyata D'Shmaya. So, Beautiful is Hagdama. It's mamash required reading. It's a 2-page introduction to all the volumes, his multi-volume, his magnum opus, the Igros Moshe. There's Dibros Moshe too. What he held of his Dibros Moshe. That's a Sugach Gamri. But you have to read the 2-page introduction to Moshe's Igros Moshe. He says all these form that are writing. He says what? I'm giving over what was near Lefina's daiti to be Lahirus Allah Lamaisa Lailu Sharot Suleda daiti. To those who wanted to know my knowledge. And then he continues. Av Shemin Aroy Hayilachayru Limnoam Alahashav Lamaisa. Shehari Gedolio Matorah B'Yirish Hashem Niman of Lahiris B'Yosef. He says the Gemara Tzotah Chavez. You're playing with fire. If someone is not Roy Lahoris and he's paskening Shilas, your mom is playing with fire. He says, why would I want to go this route? So those who are Yad Gedol Leilam Matorah B'Yirish Hashem. Notice how he says you can't just have the Torah, you have to have Yiris Hashem. Rav Lipi Yisraelson, the grandson of Rabbi Yosef, told me when he asked his 80 Rabbi Yosef, and the Friya Dekadari says, Rabbi Yosef, who can you make the brocha? Shachol and Rabbi Yosef said, Rav Moshe Feinstein, he says, why? Because the Nusach HaBroch is not just a Shecholak Mechachmoso, it's got to be an individual who's here also Kademis Lechachmoso. This Siyuma de Milsa of the Broch is Shecholak Mechachmoso Liyareyav. It has to be a Baal Yireh Shamayim. You have to have the requisite Yireh Shamayim. So you have to have Torah, you have to have Yiras Hashem. And Rabbi Yosef said about Rav Moshe, he is Shecholak Mechachmoso, and he fulfills that criterion called the Liyareyav. You can make the bracha with Shem Malchus and Rav Moshe Feinstein. That was Rabbi Yosef. Okay? Moshe says, Simi Tamzeh, he says, I want to be Nimna. He says, but take a look at Rekiveger and the Hagdama to the Sefer HaTshuva Shalom. He says, in the end of the day, he says, I can't be known in Maneya myself. He says, in the end of the day, we know Yiftach B'dorah Kishmo B'doiro, and Ein L'dayin Gemara and Sanhedrin Avav Amazin L'dayin Elamashein of Rose. And I can only be asked to be Ma'ayin, to be Miyageya, and to tell you, V'chuli, he says, Noch Lefiyin is Daiti B'zeh Shoy Rishon Mechuyav and Chachmei Dor Sarchon Loris. Av Shalo Hayu Neshav and Igil Or B'dor Chachmei HaGemara. And connected in contrast to Friya the Gedaris in Echrami. Rav Moshe says, Avadam and Amroy. But in my generation, he says, in the end of the day, if I was Miyageo, you have to share the law. And he brings Kamarayas from Sanhedrin and all the Gemaras that Avada Yemuchuyev to answer. He says, Shiloh's come my way, I'm Uchuyev to answer. He says, now that I just told you and I bought you Kamarayas, and that Lamaisa, after all my years of Yigi and Amelis B'Tayra, and I was Masik Shmaisa, Libaduchas, Yimuchavavam and Aleph, I have to go and share the Piskei Halacha with you. He says, but now, I can give you a shot in the Gemara Menachos Chav Tes. Here we are, Rabbi Sai, Siyata Nishmaya, on the coast of Parshas Yisro Matan Torah. And he says, let's go to the famous Gemara Menachos, the Tabach Chav Tes and Beis. You all know the Gemara. Moshe Rabbeinu, what happens? Gevaldik, B'Shah, Amravid Amara, B'Shah Sholem, Moshe Lamaro. Moshe goes to the heavens on high, this week's Parsha Yisro. He goes to the top of Sinai and even higher. And he sees the Eibusher is tying crowns onto the letters of the Torah. So what does he say? Who's holding your back? All the little tagin, all those osios Torah, all the little crowns that are putting on each respective letter. He's going to darshan mounds and mounds of halachas. Ben Ishchai and others say that's what's called Sefer Tehillim. Tehillim. David HaMelech is saturated in Kodesh Baruch with Tehillim, mounds and mounds of praises. Shvach Vadal Brachas. Daf Zayin Davav Amar Beis Amar Rabbi Yochanan Zayin Amar Beis Amar Rabbi Yochanan Minol and Shmagarim Mayrush Zach Sayat Zayin David Shurvela Krishna Shivas Bochos. That's the idea of saturating. That's Tehillim. He's going to dash in mounds and mounds of halachas with Osios and Torah. Frak Moshe, I have two kashas. He says, Kasha number one, move on Lashon Ksarim Hashem. What is this with crowns? Hashem is tying crowns on the letters? What do you have to tie crowns on the letters? Just tell me that you have the little tagin, you have little marks, and he's going to darshan all these words. You have to have Ksarim. I'm giving kilo, I'm giving crowns to the letters in the Torah. He says, Od Kasha, what's the Shai Lamima Akev? Who's holding your back? And he says, well, what's the Kavanah? Who's holding your back? So Rashi says, Lama Tatzarech Lahosev. He says, but that doesn't work with the Lashon Ma'akev. Kilo is Ma'akev. What's Ma'akev? Nothing's holding Hashem back. Mi ma'akev yoncha. What's going on here? Says Dr. Moshe says as follows: Lafima shabiarti meduyik loshim ksar. What is the idea? We know what Kesser symbolizes Malchus. He He says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Melech Malchei Malachim. So you would think, what? You have to be Machavi and Tamitas Ritzayni Yisbarach. You have to know the Kavanah of Hashem Yisbarach. And the Mela, there wouldn't be a Mokum, there wouldn't be any Pesach to say, Erev in your Gimel Beis, Eilav Elo Delakim Chayim. What do you mean Eilav Elo? In the end of the day, one of them has to be wrong. Again, without getting into the Ritva and all the other Hezberim, one has to be right, one has to be wrong. Teretz is what? HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you know what? Lo b'shamayim, Bava Metzion and Tess. Lo b'shamayim, the Torah is going to be given over to the Chochmei HaDairos. And that means what? They're going to look at the Osios of Torah and they're going to darshan based on their Koach HaP'sak and the Yurgam Amina Shatunarest. And they're going to come out and decipher the Torah. Kifi Daitam, Kifi Ritzainam. They're going to be Koveya. What Pshat is in the Torah. Maybe they won't be Machavim to Daito Shemokim to the Rotzon Abore. Lo Mishaneh. Says Dr. Moshe, that's why he was kosher Ksorim. He's giving a Bechina, a sense of Malchus to the Osios. You might think, what? You have to darshan those Yos Kafi Hashem Yisborch's Rotzen. Hashem Yisborch says what? No, I'm going to give crowns to the Osios Torah. They are going to be made into kings of themselves. The Torah's letters and the Torah's messages will be kings. To know what? You Chachamim, you could darshan those letters who are like kings, and you could come up and say Pshat, even if it's not what I meant, even if it's not the Pshat that I meant. It always reminds me of when they asked Rav Chaim is saying Gavaldik shtick on the Rama, Chedush Grach on the Rama. What happens when you get up to Shemaim and you get up to Ganein Shamayla and you spend hours and hours, mamash years, coming up with the Gavaldik shtickle Chedush Rav Chaim on the Rama, and you're going to come and meet the Rama Ganein Shamayla and the Sitter Akib. It's Gavaldik Amaisa. A father came down to the son. He said, I learned Rama my whole life. He says, Baruch Hashem, I'm in Ganein and I'm in row 3,000 of the Rambam Shir in the Sitter Akib. He was so happy. He was in row 3,000, and he was able to see the Rama. I learned Rambam. I learned Ash. You get the he was happy. He was in row 3,000. He was able to hear and to see the Rambam. Say, imagine Rav Chaim and Rav Chaim Shu was in row number 1. Rav Chaim, Nor Sameach, and Gavaldik, Aviyesri, all these Evan Elzo people dedicated their lives to Rambam. And Rambam would say, Rav Chaim, it's a nice shtick of Torah, but you know what? It's not what I meant. It's not what I meant, Rav Chaim. So the whole the years and the months, Rav Chaim, it's not what I meant. It's a nice shtick of Torah. It's not me. It doesn't matter. Dr. Chaim doesn't make a difference. What's the Rambam wrote? What he wrote, it became part of Torah Shalpeh. He says it's not the Rambam's anymore. It's Kilu. It has its own independent identity. And I could say Pshat and Rambam, which became part of Torah Shalpeh. Even if it wasn't, Kavanas and Ramam, it doesn't make it. Havdil Rav Moshe saying the same shtickle. Avisher says this is exactly what I meant. But what? I'm going to give them crowns. They're kings in and of themselves. You can learn up those osios, and you can darshan even if you're going to be wrong. And that's the Pshat. Mima Akev Hashem. Why don't you just put it all there? Why don't you just give us all the information? No, who's holding it back? Since I know we're going to have the Yidden like Rabbi Akiva, who are going to be Dorish Shul Havdil Torah Ladira Mishnah the Sota. What does the Gemara say right at the end of Masechah Sota? And the Mishnah Bata, when Rabbi Akiva was nifted, Mishmesh Rabbi Akiva Bata covered a Torah Zaktashi Menachas Chavtes, because he darshan the Chashivas of Torah, every coats, every oaths. How many mounds of halachas, millions, multitude of halachas you could decipher, extract and glean from every single letter in the Torah, from even the crowds, adorning the respective osios. That's covered a Torah. Samima Akiv, who's holding back? Hashem, why don't you just give it? No, Hashem, you know, so Hashem says to Moshe, who's holding me back? Rabbi Akiva is holding me back because he's going to produce so many more halachas to show covered a Torah. By making these crowns, and that has the kayak, and that's the she's Moshe. Even if I'm not the machavin to Hashem's rotzen, I'm writing the same and giving the truth based on my understanding of the P'sukei Torah, and that is good for the rotzen abari. So now let's go to Rav Moshe. Kishitaso. He has short likutim on Shas in the back of the first chelik of the Rav Moshe. On Maseches Makos Chav Beis Avei. So we quoted this before the top of Chav Beis Avei. Amar Rabba Kamatipshi Sharinchi. Tekami Mekami Sefer Tovlo Kami Gavi Rabba. Now you have the Gemara in Kedushin Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis that says you didn't stand up for Talmud Chacham and they don't stand up for Sefer Torah. Mashal the Sefer Torah is greater. That's a kasha the Ran, the Sefer Malkim, the Sefer the Bnei Yisachar, and Dvar Nachmanim. The so many Sforim Yishon Manachonim deal with that Shaila galore. What do you do with the parent stira between Kedushin Lamed Gimel and Makos Chav Beis? But stating about Makos Chav Beis, Kamatipshi Sharinchi, they stand up for a Sefer Torah and they don't stand up for a Talmud Chacham. Harik Sibba Torah Bar Miyakenu. It says in Shoitim you give 40 Makos. Asli Rabbanim Batzalei Chado. Minyan Asov Sabam. We only give 39 out of 40. So why don't they stand up For the Gaber Rabbi, Zakta Moshe, if they're not standing up for the Talmid Chacham, they're not Tipshim, they're not fools, they're Avaryonim. Elo what? Avada, they're standing up. Kedushalam on base of base, Vadat, but he's okay, Ein Zokin, Misha Koach Chachma, that's a construction. Avada, they're standing up. They're standing up because they think it's a Zelbazach. There's the Sefer Torah, and there's the Talmid Chacham. No, the Talmid Chacham is greater because he has the Shlita, he is the Yad, he's the Gaber Rabbi who tells you, you read in the Pasuk about Yakedu, Hashem's come on, no, it's not 40, we're going to darshan, Minyan, Asos, Abom, it's only going to be 39. They have a Shlita. So the is like Rav Moshe is saying, you know why it's Ksarim that Hashem is saying, I'm making this oath, this letter, this word has its own melech. You don't have to listen to the Melch Malchi Malachim. You can vadarshan this word that has melech. So who are the ones that darshaning? Once you have Rav Moshe, it is Likutim on Shas, it comes out the what? Chachamim have even a greater sense of malchus because they can decipher, they can tell you how they interpret what they think it means. So the Efshar, now it's Geshmak. You put the two Rav Moshes together, and we go to the Gemara in the end of the 5th Perek Gittin, in the bottom of Samach Beis and Aleph. Man Malki Rabbanan is how we always quote the Gemara, but the actual lotion is Amar Lei Menalach Rabbanan Ikum Olach. Remember the Siv, it says in Mishlei and Perek Ches Pasuk Tezvav and Tes. No, Perek Ches Pasuk Tezvav and Menalach and the Rabbanan Ikum Olach. Remember the Siv Bi Malachim Yamlacho. See, you have Man Malki Rabbanan. Talmid Chacham is called a Melech. What's the sin? Talmid Chacham is called a Melech. It's Geshmak. The same Rav Moshe is Akdam and Moshe. The Osios are called Ksarim. Have Ksarim. Why? Because they're their own Melech. Hashem says you can darshan them, they're going to convey a meaning the way you understand them, independent of the Ratzon of the Melech Malchi Malachim. And who's darshaning that? And who has a shlita even over the Osios of the Torah? Who has a shlita over the Malachim, the kings of the Osios? Kefi Rav Moshe, the Gaber Rabbi Talmid Chacham, is even greater than the Osios Torah. So if the Osios of Torah are called Malachim and they have Ksarim adorning their heads, then Kavachaimer, the Talmid Chacham, who has the shlita over the Osios of Torah, he has to be open Mukhrach. He has to be Begeder Melech, and you bet he is. Mamalki Rabbanan. Gittin, Samach Beis and Aleph. He is called Man Malki Rabbanan, Menolan the Rabbanan, Ikum Malachim, Tamid Chachamim. Are called Malachim. Avada they called Malachim. Why? Besides the Maral, Zarichas, and Moach Lev, and Kaved, V'chulei, they're called Malachim. The Feiner Staitel like Rav Moshe, because they have the Shlita over the Melech. They have to be a Melech to fight another, to control another Melech, and they are the Ksarim and Melech. What do we call B'Shas Matan Torah? What do we call? Our number one crowning title is Mamleches Kohanim, Megai Kadosh. Mamleches Kohanim, a kingdom of priests. The Phineas Daiti, the first Indian is what? As Hashem is getting ready to give us the Torah, and He's tying Ksarim on top of the Osias HaTorah. I'm giving over the Torah to Tamid Chachamim to decipher. Mamaki Rabbanan, the Malachim, the kings, Tamid Chachamim, are going to decipher the Osias of the Torah. Mamleches Kohanim. Rabbi say, I'm endowing every Yid in Klai Yisrael to eventually get to this Koach. You're going to become Mamleches Kohanim. So they say now, Seven Ishmael, what happens? The Malachim come down, and what do? They put Ksarim on the heads of Klai Yisrael. Ksarim, Nasev and Ishma, but Mamaki Rabbanan is nice up to the Ksarim. How do we bring it back? Cheydega, we lost those Ksarim. Don't worry, Rabbi, so you can get the figurative Ksarim right back. When you have the Shlita over the Kisrei Osios HaTorah, Mamaki Rabbanan, you put the two Rav Moshes together, and you can be a Melech who controls even Osios HaTorah. And even if you're not Mechavin to Daito Shemokom, Lo B'Shamhayim, you're Kovei on the Halacha, Gevaldik Churzel Achero Shchodosh, Atam Afilu Meizidim, Afilu Tom Afishul Broshon Chavei. You have the Shlita, that's the Chiddush of Malchus. Mamleches Kohanim, a guy Kodesh. Have a wonderful night, and a Gevaldik Heilig Hashem Kodesh. Amen.